My name is Haleemah Sadia. I am a aspiring criminal law barrister, and I sort of come under everything to do with having a visual impairment. I'm partially sighted, severely sighted impaired, legally blind, and I've recently started using my white cane. Um, in terms of my eyesight, I have none in my right eye. I can see. It's hard to say. I can't say I have none, but I can't use whatever I do have in my right eye. So I'm functionally blind in my right eye. Um, and my left eye has teeny tiny bit. So I normally do a demonstration, which is to try cover your right eye completely and then leave a little gap between your second and your third finger, and whatever you can see through those fingers, I probably have less than that. But I've had this eyesight all my life. It wasn't picked up until I was probably about 3 years old. And that's because I had enough to get around. And it wasn't until I was sort of, my mum's dad was sort of observing me, and he realized that I dropped something on the floor. It was right in front of me, but I was sort of using my hands to try feel for it, which I still do now.
Yeah.
But then he found it a bit strange. He was like, well, why can't she see it? It's right in front of her. It didn't help the fact that the floor that I dropped it on was the most patterned floor ever. So I couldn't tell what was what. Um, so then I was taken to, the hospitals, all the big hospitals you can think of, Great Ormond Street, Moorfields, Guy's. There's another one, anyone that you can probably think of, I've been there. And they don't actually know what has caused my sight loss. So a bit of a medical mystery. I've been told that I could lose my sight completely in the future. So every day is, sort of different. There's no cause. They don't know what has caused my sight loss, and they don't know whether there's a cure either. So in a nutshell, that is me.
And talking about your sight loss, it's obviously when you're unsure of the cause of it, it can be quite not only confusing, but also how to then know what the right support would be for your sight loss. You've mentioned that you recently just started using your white cane. How have you found support growing up through school, through you went through college and so on,
Yeah.
and how come you've only just started using your white cane sort of now, as it were?
Sure. So, when I was in primary school, don't really know how I got through primary school, if I'm honest, because as a 7 to 10-year-old, you don't really know what's going on in life anyway. And then to sort of know that I can't see as well as the person next to me is is something that you sort of have to figure out. So I always knew that I could not see as well as everyone else in the room. They'd give me a piece of paper to do our little, classwork. I couldn't read it. I would bring it up like so close to my face, and I would just about be able to make out like a few words. Um, I couldn't see any of the sort of displays that they have around the room that the teachers would point to and say, "Oh, look at the anti-bullying little display over there." And I guess that's where I sort of learned the art to just nod and smile and pretend like I know what they're talking about. Um, so yeah, primary school was difficult because I didn't even know what was going on. Things got a bit better when I went to secondary school. I was given support in the sense that there was a teacher that was sort of assigned to me, um, and she she didn't know what she was signing herself up for, because I'm still in touch with her now, and she's become a friend. Um, but yeah, she was sort of assigned to me at the time, and she was in most of my lessons as a teaching assistant. All the resources would go to her before they came to me, so that she could adjust them, enlarge them, and put them where I need them. And she also became like the go-to person for all things Haleemah. Uh, and I guess without her support in school and my mum's support at home, I wouldn't have been able to maybe become this confident person that I am now, because it's from her support that she sort of taught me, if you don't ask, you don't get, and the worst that someone can say is no. And throughout secondary school, these two sayings became my motto. Um, and so I school was difficult, because at the same time, like I said, I didn't used to use my cane at the time, and so it was hard for people to understand how is she, uh, not able to see. She's faking it, she of course she can see because she can get around. Um, and so that led to a few years in school being quite difficult. I was bullied a lot because people couldn't understand, that I am what I am. They just thought I was faking it. And that's quite disheartening when you're doing your best, because I have to work harder than the next person anyway, because I can see, it takes me longer to do stuff. And so I have to put in twice the effort to then achieve the best results in class, and then be told, oh yeah, that the teacher was whispering the answers into her ear. She knows she didn't get that. It's very disheartening, because I've obviously spent a lot of time trying to understand this, more time than average Joe, because it takes me longer. And then for your hard work to sort of be, completely belittled like that, I remember it's not a nice feeling. And I hope that, people don't do that, but I'm sure they still do, because obviously teenagers, what can you do? And then when I went to university, I decided to move on to campus, even though the university isn't far from where I live. And once I made that decision, the whole sort of reasonable adjustments came into mind, and I was like, okay, this decision has clearly helped me with my sight loss. So what else can I do to make things easier for myself? Because I do like to make things difficult. So then I started looking into the support that's available to me. Um, I'd I got assistive technology on my laptop, so I'm not, because at the time I was still doing all the reading myself with my eyes, which sounds weird, because obviously how else would you do your reading? But with someone who has barely any sight, that's not the right way to do it,
Yeah.
So I then started looking into assistive technology. And now I'm so used to robots speaking into my ears. I always have headphones on. And I guess that's really helped me sort of find out what works and what doesn't. I then did a university placement when I worked in Parliament for the Right Honourable David Lammy, MP for Tottenham. I was his casework officer, and having worked in such a busy environment where I used my cane when I did my placement, because it was just the most sensible thing to do. You're in London and you're in the most hectic place ever, because I was in the Houses of Parliament at the time, and seeing how well it worked for me in Parliament. When I went back to university to complete my undergraduate degree in my fourth year, I then made the decision to use my cane full on. So that was 2018, so I think 3-4 years ago. So I've used my cane since. I took the decision. There's two reasons that people with sight loss will use a white cane. The first is obviously mobility. It's a mobility tool. It helps the person be independent. But the second reason is to let others know that they have a sight loss. And I must say the second reason was the main reason for me, because I just got tired of those awkward conversations where I'd ask someone, what's the way to Starbucks, and they'd just point somewhere. They point at a sign, and I'd then have to say, oh, actually I'm visually impaired, blah blah blah. So I just got tired of that. I remember I was in a train station once and I asked someone and they pointed at a sign and I was like, oh God. So then I just started using my cane, and I use it till date, and I will continue using it. And I'm also considering getting a guide dog in the future. But yeah.
There's so much to unpack from that. And I suppose actually the very first thing I want to talk about is what you talked about at secondary school about if you don't ask, you don't get, and that idea of self-advocacy, because we talk about that a lot with the young people that come on our activities, and we're hoping to deliver a self-advocacy course next year for teenagers, which is so important because yes, in the short term at school, being able to ask for things in large print or more accessible resources or whatever it happens to be is important. But going forward, going to university where or college or into the workplace where it's just so much harder, the reality is it's just so much harder to find that accessibility. It's so important to be an advocate for yourself and know what you need. And you sound like somebody that is very, very aware of, right, this is the support I need, or this is what I need doing to make sure that I can work or what it happens to be, get around, and you're not afraid to ask for those things.
Yeah, and it's taken me a long time to get there, I'm not gonna lie. But it is definitely doable. I found that being quite upfront, not in a patronizing way, but being quite upfront in a listen, you need to know this about me, otherwise it's going to be a shock for the both of us. I'm not going to be able to perform and you're going to feel as though I've not told you. So I decided to actually put my visual impairment on my CV. It is at the bottom of my CV, but it's on my CV.
That's really interesting you've decided to do that, because again, that's another topic that comes up quite a lot, is when applying for work or other things, it's when do I disclose my vision impairment, and you're deciding to do it up front.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually something that I've spoken about a lot with people on my podcast, which obviously we'll dip into later. But all the people on my podcast who I've interviewed, they also, are quite yes or no. It's a very personal topic. However, I've found that once I've disclosed it, I've done my part. The rest is on them, so how they react, how they then take that on, it's on them. The ball is in their court. I've done my part, I've told you. I guess that's my lawyer hat on. But also I found it very useful to disclose my sight loss on my CV, because I often refer to it in my application, because it's become an identity. It takes me longer to do stuff, but at the same time it means that I am better at attention to detail, because I think I'm like, oh, I need to look at this as a fully sighted person, and then I would spot things that they probably wouldn't, because I'm spending so much time looking at this one thing. Or I have better hearing skills because I use my ears more, and I can't just say that. I need to then explain why I have better hearing skills, and then because I then talk about my sight loss in my application, it just makes sense to disclose it. And like I say, it's definitely become my identity. I know that people, I'm not sure who the target audience is. Are they like teenagers or my age?
Yeah.
Yeah. So teenagers, I remember when I was in school, that's what I struggled with, because I was like, I don't want to be known as someone who has a disability. Like it or not, that is what, it's part of your identity. It's who you are. Not in a, oh, you're disabled, but oh, I have a visual impairment, and I have achieved all these things being visually impaired. You know, it is a struggle. I'm not gonna lie. When I was 15, I didn't really know what I was doing, but since I, you know, went to uni and then got a bit older, I took that on as a, let me stop trying to hide from it. Let me stop trying to not tell people that I'm partially sighted. And let me just embrace it, really. So now I just walk into a room with my white cane and the elephant has been addressed, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
there are so many schools of thought on it, and you in a way you're right. Really, turning it into a USP is such a powerful way of using your sight loss. So, for example, when we've spoken to teenagers about doing Duke of Edinburgh's award, yes, employers will see lots of people apply that have Duke of Edinburgh's award on it, but if you've managed to complete it and you're blind, well, actually that's an extra skill set that others that have achieved the same award of you have not had to overcome. It's the same, same as lots of other things. So, for example, we've done a whitewater canoeing trip with a group of visually impaired young adults. We do a blind photography course. All of these are sort of things that if you're an employee, you think, hang on a minute, how can you do a photography course and you can't see what you're taking photos of? So you're right, it's using it as that sort of unique selling point and turning it into a positive, or as an advantage almost over others when you're competing in the job market.
Yeah, also, but at the same time, I must say that I've even struggled with this, because I don't want to then shove my disability down people's throats, you know.
Sure,
But
yeah.
but at the same time, it's the biggest challenge that I've dealt with, and it's a daily challenge, you know. Like I said, not one day is the same. I don't know whether I'm gonna have the same sight in 20 years time, or whether I'm going to be fully blind. And what works for me today doesn't work for me tomorrow. You know, I have to change things around. So everyone has challenges. For this particular group of people, it's their sight loss. But if you talk to someone else, they'll have their own challenge, whether that be family problems, or they have health issues, or they come from a different background. Everyone has challenges. And so the way I see it, my disability is my daily challenge. It makes me stronger, because I have to deal with it as well as dealing with life. So it is a USP because it's part of my identity, but at the same time, I like to strike the balance, and I like to tell people, I'm not shoving this down your throat. I don't want you to favor me because, oh, well, look at her, she's achieved so much, she's blind. No, look at her, she has achieved so much and she's blind. You know, you have to be careful with the way you're saying it and putting across your message, because I find it condescending when someone will say to me, oh my God, you're so inspirational. And I'm like, well, this is my life. I don't know anything else, you know. But at the same time, if someone else was to come to me and say, you're so inspirational, thank you for sharing, you know, it's how they say it.
Yes, yeah.
You understand? They could be saying exactly the same thing, but you get that feeling of, I don't want you to put me on a pedestal. I do want you to use me as an example, but I don't want you to use me as the poster person, you know, like, oh, she's achieved it, why can't you? Our sight loss isn't the same. Maybe we don't have the same aspirations, maybe we don't have the same drive. But the way I see it, I I deal with it every day, you know, and that's why I have loads of examples.
Yeah, I mean, so the feedback you get from somebody watching this as a teenager with sight loss that would contact you and say, I was inspired by your video, you'll get from that very, very different feedback than, say, a sighted colleague of yours that says that they found you inspiring as well. You'll take different meanings from that. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Just very quickly before we move on, you mentioned about sort of working in the Houses of Parliament. How did you find that? Just because obviously disability generally is not that well represented in Parliament. How did you find that as your day to day?
I was definitely a needle. No, I definitely stood out because not only was I using my white cane, I was a hijabi, I was brown, I am brown, and so you know, when I walked past, I did turn heads because it was just such a. I mean, I know they're doing their best to increase diversity in terms of all the protected characteristics, but it is still very much not where they should be. But in terms of support, my David Lammy's office was amazing. David Lammy is amazing. He did everything possible to make it easier for me. The office manager was amazing, is amazing. They paid for mobility training so that I could learn my way from home to my desk, quite literally, which I thought was amazing. You know, again, to use amazing, I thought it was really good because I've had mobility training before, but sometimes employers are slightly iffy about the fact if they have to pay for it, and that's not because they don't they're anti-disability. It's because it comes out of their budget, doesn't it? Budget that they have. So you know, you've got to think of the whole business plan and everything. But David Lammy's office was like, no, this is what you need, go for it. So that helped me because I then, you know, could make my way all the way from home to my desk, whereas before I would need the colleague to meet me at Westminster Tube Station and then walk me into Parliament. And sometimes when you're relying on someone else, you do feel like a burden. You're like, oh, I don't want them to think that I'm relying on them. So when you finally receive that training that you need, you know, otherwise I wouldn't know where to go. And like I said, I can't remember if I mentioned, but Parliament has a lot of glass doors. You know, I wouldn't know where the glass doors are. I'd walk into them. Whereas when I received mobility training, I was like, okay, it's third one from the left, or etc. But yeah, working in Parliament was a great experience. I got the job through my university. I did a 4-year course. So if listeners out there are looking to do a placement year, Brunel is really good for placement years. They run what's called a sandwich course, which is what I did. So you do your 2 years at uni, and then your 3rd year you'll go off and you'll work in the industry that you're doing your degree. So mine was a law degree, and I worked in Parliament, which was the most amazing experience I could think of, because David Lammy is a barrister by training himself, and obviously when you're an MP, you're doing public speaking, you know, you're doing advocacy. So that was a great experience for me. So I got the placement through my university, and it was funny because I applied in February, and it was the first placement I applied for, and it was the last interview I got. And had I not got this interview, I would have had to enroll into the 3rd year of uni and just complete my degree as a 3-year degree. So I was very grateful. The manager actually called me up and he goes, "Sorry, the election came up," and I was like, "Okay." I said, I forgive you."
I suppose that could be taken as a reasonable excuse there. Well, I think that leads on quite nicely to what you're doing now, really, which is when I spoke to you before and I kept referring to you as a barrister, you kept correcting me and saying unregistered barrister, but impressive nonetheless. Tell me a little bit about how you went down that route, why you've gone down that route, and where it's going to take you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an aspiring criminal law barrister. I have done my undergraduate law degree, which was the 4 years that I did at Brunel. Sadly, if you want to become a barrister or a solicitor, it's not enough to do an undergraduate qualifying degree. You need to then do a postgraduate course as well. So I did my postgraduate course, which I refer to as the bar course. I did that at the University of Law. And then at the same time, I did a master's in law. So I've actually got 3 law degrees. Woo! I guess the reason that I wanted to go down this route is I quite enjoy public speaking. I quite enjoy advocacy. And I guess I've got an advantage because I can't really see my audience. So, you know, where others get nervous, I just stand there like I don't know who is looking at me. No, I'm joking. You can obviously feel the eyes. You know that all eyes are on you, but you know it does help not being able to see people look at you. In order to become there's 2 types of lawyers in the UK. There's solicitors and barristers. Solicitors do they're the ones in the big law firms. So I'm sure people know Suits, the TV show. Solicitors in the UK are sort of like that, except they can't speak in court. They don't have rights of audience. That's what barristers do. So a solicitor would do all the case file, meet with the clients, do all the witness statements, and then they'd go up to the barrister and say, "Hi, can you please represent this person in court?" And then the barrister would put on their wig and gown and stand in front of the judge, and if it's a criminal case, in front of the jury, and they're the ones who would do the trial, you know?
Yeah.
So that's the difference. And I nearly became a solicitor because I thought that I would be better supported in a law firm being employed, because that's where I would come under all the, you know, sort of assistance to do with disability. Barristers are self-employed. What that means is they work for themselves. They work in a group of people. So it's called a barrister's chambers. So they work with a group of people, but you're all self-employed. So you can work when you want. You work for the, you know, it's different to being employed. So yeah, there's different types of, you know, employment statuses. And so I thought I might be better suited as a solicitor because I would have the support, the safety net of a law firm, if I need, you know, I don't know, help and assistance and stuff like that. But then I was speaking to someone, you know, they're a barrister themselves, and they know quite a bit about disability because they come from that background. They said to me that, you know, if you want to be a barrister, just go for that instead of going around their houses and trying to be a solicitor, because, you know, just go for it. And so I did. I've applied. I applied to the University of Law to study the bar course. I've finally passed all my bar exams, which was a struggle, if I'm not going to lie. And I will be called to the Bar of England and Wales hopefully next year as an unregistered barrister. Unregistered because you need to secure. It's not enough that you've done all of that. You then need to get something called a pupillage for barristers, or a training contract for solicitors. And your pupillage is like another year's training, but you're actually on the job. So you're shadowing a barrister for the first 6 months, and then they let you loose for the second, and you go represent people in courts and do their bail applications and all the sort of lower stuff, and then at the end of it, if the chambers like you, they will then offer you a tenancy, and that's when you can apply for your practicing certificate, and that's when I will become a practicing barrister. So that's why I have to say I'm an unregistered barrister, which I'm also not, because I haven't been called to the bar yet, but because I've passed my bar exams, I can say that I will be an unregistered barrister.
So it's not something that you fall into on a whim. It's you got to have some real dedication and passion towards doing this, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, once you're sort of 2 years in, 3 years in, you're like, oh yeah, let's carry on, like you sort of have to give a pep talk to yourself, and you're like, come on, 7 years in, you'll get there. Because I started my undergraduate degree in 2015. I graduated that in 2019. I'd started my bar course in 2019, graduated that this year. So I'll get there. I've spent so much time and effort. I will get there. It's and then if it doesn't work out for me once I am a fully practicing barrister, then I can be like, okay, at least I gave it my best shot. But until I get to that stage, I'll keep going. And as with the route that I've taken, there's always opportunities to progress. So you can then become a QC, which is Queen's Counsel, and they're like the top of the shelf barristers. So they'll be instructed for all the big trials you can think of. And then after that, you can probably apply to become a recorder, which is a part-time judge, and then you can apply to become a full-time judge. And then obviously once you become a judge, you want to then get to like the highest court in the United Kingdom, which is the Supreme Court. So there's always opportunities to progress in the career that I've chosen. So I don't think one day is going to be boring. Currently, I am working for the Police and Crime Commissioner. So every police force has a crime commissioner. The role of the crime commissioner is to hold the chief constable, who is the head of the police force, to account. So every 4 times a year they meet and they sort of scrutinize each other, saying, oh, why haven't you done this? It's far civil than that. But that's the role of the commissioner. And at the same time, if you make a complaint against the police and you then want to appeal your complaint because you're not happy with the outcome, the commissioner's office is the appeal body. And so I'm currently in a position where I'm being trained on all this kind of stuff, and it really helps because working in this capacity is allowing me to see everything that happens before it gets to trial. I know what happens once it's in court, but working for a police force, I'm seeing what happens before it gets to trial, and I'm seeing the other side of the coin, somewhat the other side of the coin, and so I find that very interesting and useful. So that's where I am now.
And I have no doubt you're going to get there and get to do what you want to do. So it'd be great to find out in the future how you're getting on. I suppose part of the way people can find out how you're getting on is through your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So a friend of mine and me have started a podcast series called Disability is Not a Bar. It's a play on words, because obviously bar as in like barrister. But we're both two disabled aspiring barristers. She doesn't want to be a criminal barrister, though. She wants to be a family barrister. So, you've got a bit of a range. And the purpose of the podcast is to interview other aspiring barristers or members of the judiciary with a disability, and talk about their journey to the bar. We are very fortunate that we've had a very good following. We've even been given a shout out by the Times, which was quite cool. Yeah, I know. And David Lammy gave us a shout out as well. So, guys, it's the place to be. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify. And if you want to learn more about my journey, I actually am interviewed in episode 1, and then I interview my co-host in episode 2, so that you can learn more about, us and our journeys to the bar with a disability. And then in the following episodes, we interview aspiring barristers. We've got our first barrister on the podcast, and we will soon have our first judge on the podcast. So it's very exciting. The podcast will hopefully help listeners, just even if you don't want to become a lawyer, which I might have put you guys off by telling you how much there's to do. Please don't be put off, and I'm also happy to answer any questions if anyone listening wants to ask me. So Luke, I'm happy for you to send them to me. But what was I going to say? Oh, but the podcast will hopefully it will show you how whatever career path you choose, you can get there. So I know that in my podcast we speak about disability at the bar. So as barristers, what our journey has been, but we all sort of talk about our individual challenges and what we've needed to do to overcome that. So even though if you guys don't want to become barristers, I would still encourage you listening, because hopefully it will give you suggestions of what you can do when you get to university, or what you can do when you get to sixth form or college, because you're not alone. We've all been through it, and if I can help by pointing you to a helpful resource, then yeah, listen to the podcast.
It sounds like there's some really important conversation topics that, yes, like you say, not just relating to law or a specific career, but just general advice that I think could be applied across the board, really.
Yeah, absolutely. We spoke to loads of people who, we had the discussion about disclosure, like when do you disclose your visual impairment, and that's exactly the same sort of conversation we've had with all our guests, and some of them have been absolutely disclosed, or no, I disclose later, or I don't know when to disclose because I've only recently found out that I have a disability. So there's loads of different perspectives. So yeah, I'm sure if someone's looking for just a bit more research or a bit more something guidance, then this isn't just a plug, although it would be amazing to listen to it, but I generally think it would help, because had I had something like this when I was 15, it would have helped a lot. It really would. And it wasn't available. Something like this wasn't available when I was younger.
Well, I'm sure we will share the details of it all when we post this video as well. The sort of final topic we want to talk about, and something that you were quite keen to talk about, was the subject of disability in the South Asian community, or perhaps lack of conversation, if you like, and how you've approached that, and what you'd like to see change, possibly. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, so in terms of my experience in talking about disability in the South Asian community, it hasn't been my immediate family. Like, my mum and my brothers and sisters are amazing, spot on, got their heads screwed on. it's everyone else. Especially like, you know, when you're I've experienced this I guess more when I've started to use my cane, is I always get the, you know, the double look, or they're staring at me but they're walking straight, and so their heads like this but they're walking. Or if I, you know, if I order an Uber or a taxi, I always get the, so I've said I use my cane to identify, you know, that I've got a sight loss, because sometimes the drivers would drive off because they can't find me. So now that I have my cane, I just say to them, I'm the one with the white cane. And then once I get in the car, it's most of the drivers, it's just non, you know, it's not nice. Like I get oh, you know, what's happened to your eyes? Or I get the question a lot, which is can you see a little bit? And when I answer yes I can, they go, oh, that's okay then, as if my challenges aren't, you know, real challenges. Like,
Yeah.
oh, as long as you're not fully blind, you're fine. But just the lack of education and the lack of common decency, like you wouldn't go up to someone and just ask them about something else. So why would you do that here? And I found in the Asian community that disability isn't spoken about. It's sort of brushed under the carpet. God forbid your child has a disability. Oh no, their life is over. Who will marry them? Who will, you know, you're going to have to. They see it as the person is a burden. They can't have independence. That someone will need to be there all the time to cater for them. And why that's negative is, if someone is brought up in that way, they're going to think, I can't live without this person. I need someone to look after me. And that's not true. You know, having a disability, or having a disability isn't the end of the world. Firstly, it's not like we chose to have a disability, you know, it was our God-given gift. And so it's our challenge. It's something we have to deal with every day. It's something we have to deal with and not hide away from. And I think seeing the reactions that I was getting when people found out that I was visually impaired sort of made me do it more, if that makes sense, because I now see it as a way to normalize stuff. I live in quite a heavy. I'm not sure if it's heavy, but I see them. Do I see them? I see them quite a lot, and so I feel as though any opportunity that I can get to educate or normalize the fact that someone quite young can be blind. It's not something that you get when you're in old age, you know. And equally, that's what we do on the podcast. Is my co-host, she has let me get this right, fibromyalgia. Yeah, that was me remembering it. I don't have it written down, but I wanted to say it properly. And she's only recently been diagnosed, and she uses a walking stick. And so, you know, she's not South Asian. But people go up to her and say, "Oh, why have you got a stick? What have you done to your leg?" And I guess the what's rude about this is the fact that people think that they deserve an answer. You know, it goes back to the way in which people speak, and the tone in which they speak to you. If it's condescending and patronizing, then I'm going to be made to feel quite vulnerable, and I'm going to be like, I need to get out of this environment as soon as I can, because I don't like the way I'm being treated. Whereas if someone was to ask me, you know, do you mind me asking how your sight loss was caused, or that's a general question, I will answer it. I'll be like, I don't know.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
tell me. So yeah, I'm doing my best to try and raise awareness for my visual impairment and my disability within my community, on my social medias as well. So every chance that I get, I would, I'll sort of post a picture of me with my cane and a little story time type of post. Um, but yeah, it's part of my life, it's not something I can hide.
I suppose what you're touching on there is that there is this vulnerability with disclosing your disability, or perhaps seeking for help outside of family or close friends, or whatever it happens to be, and perhaps approaching organisations such as VICTA or the RNIB or whatever, or whoever it happens to be, is not something that would be a first port of call.
Yeah.
But it's actually making it aware that organisations like ourselves, like others, are there to support in lots of different ways. At VICTA, sort of two of the main ways, and this is not a deliberate plug, but just two of the main ways are through grants for assistive technology, or the activities, which covers sort of social elements of and independence and so on. So that there. It is a scary time when you first discover your sight loss, or your child has got sight loss, but actually that there is external support out there, as well as your own network of friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely. There's external support out there, and for you not to be like, oh, I need to cage this person and protect them, and they can't do anything for themselves, and it's my duty to, no, just treat them as if they were someone that had full sight, and let them choose what they want to be, and let them live their life, and that's sadly, I guess education just needs to be everywhere, not just the South Asian community.
And I think that's a society-wide need is for education, for us, obviously sight loss, but disability generally. And I think the what you're doing with your podcast and being quite vocal and a public speaker is doing a lot for that. Haleemah, I could speak and listen to you all day. Thank you so much for doing this video with us. I think, like you said, if anyone is interested in getting in touch with you or asking some more questions, I can put them in touch with you.
Yep, absolutely. And thank you so much for, having me on this video. I do hope that people make it all the way to the end, because I do like to babble.